passed off as mere prescription drugs, like in some of the examples I gave: Adderall, OxyContin, Percocet, that people all across America are dying from. Well, let's take another angle on this problem. Almost all of these drugs come from Mexico. Almost all the drugs in America today come from Mexico. They almost all come from a handful of vicious, depraved cartels in Mexico. Cartels that have taken on the powers of a quasi-state. Cartels that the Mexican government either cannot or will not crack down on. So let's look at it from that perspective. It's past time that we bring the full weight of the United States government to bear on these cartels and to destroy them for what they're unleashing on our streets. Imagine if ISIS or Al-Qaeda set up shop across our border and was responsible for more than 100,000 American deaths every single year. What would we do? What would you do? I know what we wouldn't do. We wouldn't hesitate to act. And that's exactly what we should do with these Mexican cartels. Unfortunately, President Biden has done the opposite. Since the day he took office, he has flung open our borders, created a border crisis, and made it easier than ever to smuggle massive amounts of illegal drugs into the United States. Already this year, the Border Patrol has found over 12,000 pounds of fentanyl being smuggled over our border. 12,000 pounds. You may not be able to put that in perspective. Let me put it in perspective for you. It is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in America many, many times over. That doesn't even include any fentanyl brought in by the hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens who the DHS calls gotaways. President Biden could declare the fentanyl peddling cartels to be foreign terrorist organizations, but he has refused to do so. So the bill that I'm about to bring up would give him additional tools, short of labeling these cartels terrorists. My bill would create a new designation called a significant transnational criminal organization, and it would enable the federal government to impose many of the same sanctions and use many of the same tools against cartels that it already does against terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Those would include barring cartel members and their immediate families from entering the United States, freezing assets belonging to the cartels to hit their wallets, and to keep them from profiting off of death and destruction, and enabling civil and criminal penalties for anyone who provides material assistance or resources to cartels. Now, the Democrats have just blocked my bill that would keep new fentanyl variants illegal. They've just blocked another bill that would target they're going to block a bill later today that would keep new fentanyl variants illegal. They just blocked another bill that would target drug traffickers who trick people into taking fentanyl that kills them. I hope at least Democratic senators would be willing to say that we should give the Biden administration more tools to use against the Mexican cartels, some of the worst and most depraved criminals on earth. Therefore, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of my bill, Senate Bill 621, the Significant Transnational Criminal Organization Designation Act, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Objection.
Serving the right to object.
The Democratic whip.
The senator from Arkansas's views on immigration are well known. He's been consistent in opposing immigration. But it's interesting to me that people like him who oppose immigration always at the end seem to go after the same people, mothers and children. We saw it with the cages that kids were kept in. We saw it when kids were forcibly removed from their parents at the border during the Trump years. We've seen it time and again, and now we see it with the governor of Florida and the governor of Texas putting mothers and children on buses and busing them off hundreds of miles away from where they were picked up, whether there's any contact there or not. Mothers and children are always a focal point of anti-immigration rhetoric, and once again, this bill does that. I agree completely when it comes to stopping transnational criminal organizations, but to focus the bill on innocent spouses and children, including minor children, and make them the target of the bill seems to me going beyond any reasonable law enforcement. There is a narrow exception in the bill that allows a spouse or child to be admitted to the United States if they can somehow convince the consular officer that they did not know or could not reasonably have known their spouse or parent's membership in a criminal organization. But there's no exception for battered spouses or children who are often victims of these organizations themselves. And the bill gives what appears to be unreviewable discretion to these consular offices to decide whether an innocent spouse or child has renounced the organization. These transnational criminal organizations must be sanctioned and stopped. But this is not the way to do it, going after mothers and children. And I want to make a point, since the senator concluded after my last statement that I am somehow soft on crime. Could I go through a short list here of bills that I voted for to get tough on crime? Let's take a look at this bill, the American Rescue Plan. That American Rescue Plan passed in the United States Senate and provided billions of dollars to state and local communities for police and crime protection. More money for police and crime protection from this Senate to those communities. I voted for it. The senator from Arkansas voted against it. Then the Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In that bill was $430 million investment in our ports of entry, helping DHS to screen vehicles for fentanyl. You see these drugs come through ports of entry. This idea of a backpack full of drugs being hiked over the border by someone in the middle of the night, that's not where the bulk of these drugs come from. They come through the port of entry. So we put $430 million investment to make those ports of entry even stronger and tougher, and I agree with that completely, helping Department of Homeland Security to screen vehicles to stop fentanyl from coming in. I voted for that. The senator from Arkansas voted no. Who's soft on crime? Then we passed the March Omnibus Appropriations Bill, tens of millions of dollars in increased funding for hiring police officers and technology upgrades at the border to detect and seize fentanyl and other illicit cargo. I voted for that. The senator from Arkansas voted against it. Who's soft on crime? And when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most serious bipartisan step Congress has taken to end gun violence in 30 years, I voted for it. The senator from Arkansas voted against it. Who's soft on crime? The American people can see which party is passing legislation that actually funds law enforcement, addresses crime and violence in a thoughtful way, and they can see when the bills come up on the floor, one party gives the speeches, the other party gives the votes. I'm going to continue to vote to support the police and put an end to this drug crisis in America in a thoughtful and sensible way. I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I think we
The junior senator from Arkansas.
know who's soft on crime. It sounds like I hit a nerve. I didn't stand up here saying I'm not soft on crime 5 or 6 times in a row. It's the senator from Illinois who said that, just like Senate Democrats have been saying it for the last several months, just like their candidates all across America are saying it. But let's look at the first bill he mentioned, the American Rescue Plan. You know what that is, right? The American Rescue Plan? That's their $2 trillion wasteful spending bill from last spring. That's responsible for 13% inflation. You know what also included in it? A measure that would give stimulus checks to prisoners. That's right, depraved, violent felons, murderers and rapists and drug traffickers all across America. People like the Boston Marathon bomber got stimulus checks last year because the Democrats believe that criminals are really at heart victims as well, victims of an oppressive society and system. If I'm not mistaken, when I offered my amendment to prevent prisoners from getting stimulus checks, I think it was the senator from Illinois who stood up and blocked it. I know that he voted against it. I know that he wanted prisoners to get stimulus checks. That's what he's talking about. Or what about his objection to this bill that it's going to target mothers and kids, the poor mothers and children of drug kingpins, a very common feature of American sanctions efforts. In fact, sanctions efforts that we're doing exactly against Russian oligarchs and regime figures, which I support, by the way. I support. No, the wives and the children of Russian oligarchs and Mexican cartel kingpins should not benefit from their ill-gotten gains. But I care more about the lives of American citizens, the 100,000 plus American citizens that we lose every single year than anyone else in the world. So the Biden administration's policy, though, is that we'll use this tool against Russians, but we're not going to use it against Mexican cartel members. I think that goes to show you where their priorities are. So again, just to recap, we tried to pass legislation that would have imposed heightened penalties on drug traffickers who misrepresent their drugs and say they don't contain fentanyl. The senator from Illinois blocked it on behalf of the Democrats. Just now, we tried to give the Biden administration more tools to target the cartels that are smuggling these drugs into our country, that are killing 100,000 of our fellow citizens. Again, on behalf of Senate Democrats, the senator from Illinois blocked it. I say again, over 108,000 Americans were killed by drugs last year. Yet the Democrats continue to refuse to crack down on drug traffickers and cartel kingpins. Some of my other colleagues are going to offer similar bills today, just like I'm going to offer yet again my permanent fentanyl scheduling bill that would stop the annual kabuki dance here of the Democrats demanding some pro-criminal law just so we can permanently add fentanyl.
Officers serve a critical role in interdicting drugs before they hit our streets.
Senator, as I say often, the way at DEA, we are the only single mission federal law enforcement agency committed to narcotics and to stopping the global supply chain. We play offense, and so we're tracking these cartels worldwide and across.
So is that a yes? We've got limited time.
DHS's responsibility is to maintain the southern border and the ports of entry. Our investigations do tell us that the vast majority of fentanyl is coming in the ports of entry, two particularly in California and two in Arizona.
So is that a yes, that you would agree that CBP officers, both on the southern border and the ports of entry, play a critical role in interdicting drugs?
Yes, Senator. I believe it's a DHS responsibility, and it's a critical one.
So if we decided to cut the number of Border Patrol agents dramatically, let's say in half, would you agree that would hurt our efforts to stop illegal drugs?
Senator, I would defer some of this to the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Mayorkas.
You're not willing to answer that question?
But here's what I would say about this. We believe that DHS plays vital defense.
Okay, those are talking points. Would cutting the number of CBP agents in half hurt our ability to stop drugs? Yes or no?
Senator, I believe it would.
Okay. That's effectively what's happened under the Biden administration. Because right now today, more than half of the CBP agents are engaged in housekeeping and chauffeurs and babysitting of the 5.5 million illegal aliens who have crossed the border. They're not on the border. They're not at the ports of entry. They are instead processing the highest rate of illegal immigration in history. Now, Democrat members of Congress have the remarkable claim that the open borders under Joe Biden has no impact on the record fentanyl and drugs that are flooding across our borders. Between October 2021 and September 2022, one CBP source estimated there were 364,000 gotaways, people that ran away at the southern border. Another Border Patrol officials put the number of gotaways at 1.2 million. Gotaways can vary from terrorists on the terror watch list. In fiscal year 2022, 98 people on the terror watch list were encountered at the southern border that we know of. Or they can be drug dealers carrying drugs. Is that correct?
Senator, I'm going to defer questions on the border and the ports of entry to the Department of Homeland Security.
So the DEA has no view on whether drug dealers crossing the border carry drugs?
Senator, as I said, from our investigations, what we see is that the majority of fentanyl
I didn't ask the majority. I said drug dealers and gotaways are carrying drugs, many of them.
Senator, what we see is mostly what we see is mostly tractor trailers and personal vehicles.
All right, so you're sticking to the talking points closely, and congratulations, it's the Democrat talking points, that the open borders don't matter, that 328,000 or 1.2 million gotaways don't matter. We had 100,000 people die last year of drug overdoses. My sister died of a drug overdose just over a decade ago. This is a crisis, but it is a man-made crisis. This administration made a conscious political decision to open the borders. And one of the results is they have turned Mexican drug cartels into multi-billionaires. In 2018, the amount of money cartels made from human trafficking, according to the New York Times, was $500 million. Now, just from human trafficking, the cartels are making $13 billion a year. Again, according to the New York Times, that's a 2,600% increase. Administrator Milgram, the single best thing that happened to Mexican drug cartels in history was Joe Biden becoming president, opening the border, and making tens of billions of dollars for these vicious criminals. In your judgment, is it a good thing that these cartels now have tens of billions of dollars from human trafficking and drug trafficking?
Senator Cruz, I really appreciate the opportunity to answer your question. And as I have said clearly and will continue to say, there are two cartels in Mexico, the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartel, that are responsible for the devastation that we are seeing on the streets of our country. It is our top operational priority to defeat those two cartels and to stop the fentanyl and methamphetamine that is flooding into our communities.
Would you answer the question I asked? Is it a good